Hello and welcome to a Xero how-to where we're going to be sharing the secrets of some of the things you can do with bank rules and how to just make your life altogether much easier. So let's have a look at the demo company, and I have actually just gone into my reconciliation screen in here. So the first thing that we often find with bank rules is basically you'll have repeat transactions where they won't have an invoice, but they'll be treated in the same manner with each posting. But the values may change, they may remain the same. So what we're going to do is we're going to set up bank rules for some of these items, and a classic example, and the one we're going to start with, is a bank fee. So first things first, we want to select options and we want to create a bank rule. So the reason we do this for bank fees is because there's no invoice, there's no VAT impact, it's always going to be posted to bank fees, so we're going to set this up here.
And it kind of is what it says on the tin, isn't it? That's the important thing for me, is that it is what it says on the tin.
Now, the first thing to note when you set up a bank rule is that it will have a variation of options already created for you. I think this overcomplicates it, and actually it means it's not future-proofed against future posting. If a naming convention in your bank changes at all, Xero is trying to pick up that it equals a field. So the first thing I do is remove one field, set this section to any text field, and rather than using equals, use contain. Now this is much more useful because what it means is if this naming convention changes even the slightest bit, it will still have, hopefully, the same text involved. So
they might change that to corp, or they might put an extra space in, or there are changes that happen quite often in bank exports that cause issues. I don't know, with
it does happen
like
a lot. So because it's a bank, I want to set my contact as my banking provider. And basically, I want to set up the amount for bank charges down here. So fill in the description, search for your bank fees account, check that it's no VAT. And this is the final step, which I would say with bank rules, which is really important. Give the rule a title. So what actually is useful here is to say what you're doing. So you might actually be a rule for bank fees. Helps if I can see. So rule for bank fees. And what we like to do is we like to say where on earth we're actually coding an item to. So we're coding it to 404 bank fees. Now the reason we do this is so when we look at the actual bank rule from our screen, we can see exactly where it's going to be posted to, so that we're not accidentally coding something incorrectly. So now I've actually selected OK on that, and I've refreshed onto my reconciliation screen. I can see that I have a incorrectly spelt bank rule, but it is going to bank fees, which is the important part here.
So say you need to correct that. You can do that from here or from the top of the screen where you've just posted it.
Yep. Now I'm going to come into here. I'm going to go across to bank fees, and I'm going to correct it because I want it to obviously be nice and tidy.
Now, the other thing I do quite frequently when I'm doing the bank fees, if you pop back into that rule again, use the one at the top where it's just said the fees have been created, and you can click to edit. So the thing that I quite like to do when I set up bank fees is look at the number of banks that that's applied to. So this particular fee, if you scroll down into, there we go, this particular fee is only going to be, this rule is only going to be applied on the one bank account. I usually put all of my bank fees on all my rules on all bank accounts.
Yep, that comes in very handy because then you don't need to set up the rule multiple times. You can just transition it.
Particularly if you're waterfalling and you've got multiple account codes.
Yeah, and they may be with the same banking provider, so they may have the same references. So other things we can set up is, speaking of other bank accounts, we can set up transfer rules. So this e-bank deposit may actually be a transfer from my savings account. Now I can set up a bank rule. Now if I go in to create a bank rule from here, what it will do is it will ask me what receive money rule I want to make. But
you don't want a transfer money rule.
Exactly. So what I'm just going to do is, once again, change to any text field, because bear in mind, an item that's in the description might be in a reference one month, might be in a description another month, might be in a payee, so they can move around the bank fields. Now I'm going to have this contains e-bank deposit. If it's always going to contain that field, I'll leave that as is. Now I want to create a transfer. Now which account do I want it to go into? So if I ever see e-bank deposit, it's going to relate to my business savings account. So this is what I want to set in here. And what I would actually do in the bank rule is say transfer to savings.
Yeah, and these are really important, setting up a proper title to a rule. So one, so you can see what it is, and number two, so you can see where it goes.
And the beauty about transfer rules is they work both sides. So what you can have is basically, I haven't got an example of it here, but if you're transferring from the current account to the savings account, it will do both sides of that rather than just having it on the receive side or the spend side. You can get both ways. Now, what we can see here is the naming convention in our rules now is much clearer as to what's going on. But this 7-Eleven one really isn't very clear as to what it's doing. And this is why we use the naming convention. Because actually, we know exactly where these ones are going and what we're intending to do.
But you don't know where the 7-Eleven goes until you go in to apply the rule, which isn't as time-saving as you'd expect it to.
No, because all of a sudden, you don't know where it's going. So if I look at 7-Eleven, I can see what's happening. So I can see which account code it's going to. I can also see that it's applying VAT, which is a little bit unusual for a bank rule. I generally say, we don't apply bank rules when there's VAT involved because you need the VAT supporting document, and sometimes they may not be present.
And also, some of the stuff that you're buying from a corner store or a general expense, some of the things that you're buying may not always have that on.
Yeah.
So if you're using a bank rule, I would almost always default to a tax rate of no VAT. And unless you're doing a bank rule for something that you have a tax document for, there are some subscriptions, for example, networking subscriptions, training costs, that might give you an annual invoice where it's broken down on one document that you get at the beginning of the year and then it relates to every transaction afterwards. In that case, it is fine to use a rule and to use the VAT.
Yeah.
But generally, if you're using VAT, you'd expect that to come through on a purchase invoice or a receipt and not through a bank rule.
So just remember, if you're changing account codes, the tax rate may default to it will default to whatever you've got set up here. Now, I wouldn't normally use general expenses, but in this example, I'm just going to add it to the detail in the bank rule, and I'm just going to keep it as is, but I've just changed the VAT rate so that it's defaulted to no VAT. But now I can see what it's doing, so it's much clearer for my bank rules what exactly is going on, which makes it an easier decision to click OK or to not. Now, other bank rules we can set up are things where there may not be any VAT involved, such as like parking, travel. So some of these might be exempt, some of these might not have VAT on at all whatsoever. So what we might decide to do is create a bank rule for these ones. So central city parking, as an example, may be one of these. So I'm just going to set up another rule for central city parking.
Yeah, see, I would then change that so that any text field contains parking.
Yep. And let's do that. Now, what I might actually have is multiple contacts which have a reference of parking. So when it goes to setting the contact might change. So I either have the choice of allowing it to be entered during reconciliation, or I could use like a centralized contact for, say, parking. And that way I don't need to worry about updating this each time. So let's set this as parking. I don't think I have a parking account, so I'm going to use travel in this example. And actually, this may be either exempt or it may be no VAT in this example. Now, here I'm just going to set my bank rule to say this is going to travel. And what can also be quite useful, actually, is if you put whether or not any VAT is inclusive in the rule. So that can be really, really handy. Because that way you can identify you've definitely removed the VAT element.
And there are some parking charges for privately run car parks that do have VAT on. So the majority won't, but the occasional ones do.
Yep. So we want to make it clear that when we're posting these, we aren't recovering any VAT, and therefore if we get the receipt, we want to go back
and then edit the transaction.
Exactly. So now we have much clearer bank rules. Now there's two more sections to actually show you guys. So first one's combination of wages and dividends. So with wages, you might be paying multiple staff members, but they may have a shared reference field which you're using. Say you run a payroll and you pay them all using the reference field of wages. So I've actually got different names, but a shared field in the reference field. So I may decide in here that actually I'm going to change my reference field to any text field contains, and actually it's wages, which is always going to be the consistent format because I'm always going to pay them. Now the difference here is you will have different contacts. So you may decide with wages it's easier to set them up as individual rules for individual contacts,
which is what I do.
Yeah, that's usually what I would do, to be fair. But actually, you can have it pick up on the wages reference field as well. But then, like I said, you'd need to set this to be entered during reconciliation, so you'd need to do some manual entry anyway.
Yeah, so which to me takes too long.
Yeah,
so I
just,
would, yeah.
So,
the whole point of using rules is to try and make things a whole lot simpler and to make your life a lot easier. And therefore, you want to make the rules as specific as possible so that it picks up everything that you want to code, so that you literally just have to press OK. But you need to be confident that the rule is doing exactly what it says on the tin and it is going to the right place. So you do need to check and test. And again, as Harry was saying earlier, make sure that you know where your costs are coming from and where they're going to, so you don't have to keep clicking into the rule to check each one.
Yeah. So there I can see it's paying into wages payable, which is correct. But if I'd set this up and actually it was paying into, say, gross wages in the P&L, I'd be able to spot by the naming convention that I'm posting this in an incorrect manner. So I know, and also it's helpful because if I've set this up to pick up Mr. A demo, but I haven't picked up the reference of the wages field, they may actually be paid expenses and I may accidentally incorrectly code it to wages payable if I'm not paying proper attention to the transaction.
Yep, so what you want to do on these is make sure you've got wages, expenses, mileage, anything that you might pay to your employee clearly identified in the transaction details.
Yep. Dividends I could do in the same way, and as mentioned with wages, I just create this transaction for the multiple wages accounts. Now, there's another little feature we can use in bank rules, which is a really, really crafty little way of using it. But say we've got like a banking provider who we're making constant repayments to. The value may potentially change, and this may be the case because actually we're paying down a liability, but we're also paying variable rate of interest.
Yeah.
So when we post the transaction, it's actually got two line items involved. So because this may vary each month, what we actually want to do is put a bank rule in place so we don't accidentally code it somewhere where we're putting it all to capital or all to interest. So what we're going to do is use a bank rule as a reminder. Now this is quite a handy little feature. So basically I would set up the bank rule in a way that I normally would. I want this to pick up on the reference field or the description field of specifically the loan repayment alone. So it might be that I always have, in fact actually what was the reference field I had on this contact? Might actually have loan repayment. I would be so lucky to have that reference, but for this example I do.
This example we do, but yeah. There'll often be a specific example relating to that, and sometimes it's the loan account number, or it does say a loan repayment, or sometimes it's not so clear.
Yeah. Now this is the part where we can get clever.
Actually, sometimes it's also a fixed amount.
Yes, it may very well be a fixed amount. So it can be done. Now, there's two ways of doing this. If you've got a bank loan and you always pay a fixed amount of capital, you can either set this up as two lines and basically have one as a fixed line item. So this might be capital, and this might be paying down my liability. I don't know if I have a liability account in here for loans. Let's use this one. Let's use line. So I might be paying down a fixed amount of, say, £750 a month to capital. Now the remainder might be interest. Now if this is the case, I can simply split it out. Part 3 is for fixed items, part 4 is what to do with the remainder. So actually the remainder is all interest, it's nice and simple. Then that saves me the headache of having to sort it out, because I know for a fact every time this bank payment is posted, even if the value changes, I've still got the £750 capital repayment, and then whatever's left over is interest.
And what you can see here is the difference between a 900 loan account, which reduces the balance in your balance sheet, and a 437 interest account, which is an interest charge to your profit and loss.
Yeah.
So you could also have a separate interest paid or a loan interest paid account there if you wanted to separate your interest on different loans or different agreements.
Yeah. But if, as an example, I don't want it to do that for me automatically because it's more complicated than that.
Yeah, so it's a variable rate one. They're the real tricky ones.
What I might actually do is basically create a rule where I don't want it to actually post anything. I want it to remind me to do something. So the way we do this is we change the contact to be entered during reconciliation, which means we have to action something before we can physically post the bank rule by pressing OK. So what we might do is put in the description just something like check rule title.
Or it could be for something like this, you can for some loan accounts you can log on and see So say you've got an IWOCA loan, that
Yep.
interest varies each time. So if you've got an IWOCA loan, you can log on and you can look at the amount of interest you're paying with each instalment. Sometimes you can log on and download a loan statement. Sometimes you have to wait, and you might be waiting to the end of the quarter or the end of the year to get a loan statement sent to you from your bank.
Yep.
So it all depends on how your information is presented to you as to how you can use this field.
Yep. And then with the account code, you can post it somewhere that's blaringly obvious, or you can post it to the loan account. So somewhere that's basically, the idea of this is we're not actually going to be posting this rule. So wherever we want this account code is basically wherever we wouldn't want to see a transaction. So you might even choose it to suspense.
Yeah.
So it stands out like an absolute sore thumb. And then in the reference field for the title, this is where we get really clever. So we might have a loan repayment as the reference field, but we might say, rather than where we're posting it, we might actually say check capital and interest. So basically what we're doing is we're saying, hey, rather than actually posting this, check something first, because it might be more complicated than that. So when I'm back in my bank reconciliation, I can scroll down and I can see I have my loan repayment for 943 and I have a bank rule set up. But unlike the bank rules around it, I cannot select OK. And the reason for this is because I have to enter in a contact name first before I can do anything. So it's a nice little prevention tool to stop me accidentally posting something somewhere where I really didn't want to post it, or rushing it and just misallocating it.
Yeah, now I use that quite often if I want something flagged that I don't want the client to post, but I want them to talk to me about first.
Yeah.
So, and that quite often is loan repayments, because I have access to the loan account and the bookkeeper perhaps doesn't.
Yeah.
So that's really handy for using as a reminder.
And then because this one obviously locks us out of the account without posting the contact name, when it comes to actually posting the transaction, all we would do is simply select don't apply rule and then post it however we need to. Yeah. So that's the way of getting around that, but that's the way of using these rules to help prevent errors and working towards your advantage. So handy little features in bank rules.
Yeah,
and
quite clever, aren't they?
Yeah.
There's more you can do with them than just create transactions.
Yeah.
So the one thing that we would say is, if it doesn't have VAT on it, if it's a common transaction, if it's something like, you know, a Dropbox or you know, a US service that you buy that you don't have the receipts for, you don't have Receipt Bank to go and get those for you, then just put them through as a rule. You know, Dropbox is Dropbox is Dropbox. It can't be anything else. So it kind of is what it says on the tin. For those sorts of things, I wouldn't worry too much about going and collecting every individual invoice, because it can't be anything else.
Yeah, but the value might change slightly in your bank account.
Yes.
So it might change from it's like £70 to £71 sort of thing. So just keep an eye out for that, and that's why bank rules are so useful, because otherwise you'd have to go in and you'd have to find the invoice for something which just doesn't add value. So it's helpful to use bank rules on those items especially.
And that, in fact, is our profit hack for this tutorial, isn't it? Is the profit hack is make life as easy as possible for yourself.
Yes.
And don't create work where there isn't any value added to it.
Yep, got to agree with that. Thank you very much for listening today, guys. I hope you found this video useful. If you do have any queries, please do let us know in the comments. And likewise, if you enjoyed this video, please do share your views. We'd love to hear them. Thank you very much, guys. Take care.
That's great. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.